I suppose that when the history books come to be written, this rather modest, slim document will stand probably beside the treaty, beside the Declaration of Irish Neutrality in the Second World War, the decisions about the our joining the European Union, the issues dealing with the IRA and violence in Ireland, as probably one of the most important documents presented to this Dáil. And it's presented now on a snowy 1st of December evening, and inevitably because of the weather, it has been difficult for people to be present here. But also, I suppose, true to form, the Minister has decided to snuck it in just as we approach early evening on a snowy December's day. And I think it ill becomes him not to have given it to the opposition parties and have allowed an analysis. I mean, the printing is not hot or warm, so clearly it must have been printed some couple of hours earlier. Now, I want to say to the Minister in relation to this document, which will basically tie Ireland hand and foot to a bad deal which was negotiated on behalf of Irish citizens and the Irish people at the weekend by a minister who appointed as his plenipotentiaries rather anonymous senior officials in the Department of Finance, with, I understand, associated assistance from the Governor of the Central Bank and from the head of the NTMA. But I understand that the principals negotiating for the Minister were a small group of officials from the Department of Finance, known to a few of us, but I don't think known to the general public, and this is what the Minister has signed off on. Minister, you used, for such an important document, some extraordinary phraseology in your presentation to the House. I was making some quick notes. We can look at the blacks later on. You said, in relation to the bondholders, there was too much discussion, far too much discussion, domestic noise, and you're nodding in agreement. So that's what Fianna Fáil has to say to the citizens of this country who have the temerity to discuss, for the sake of themselves and their children and their grandchildren, what Fianna Fáil proposes to sign off as a non-negotiable agreement, and something that they hope will serve as a straitjacket around the necks of a future government. Well, I don't accept your too much discussion, your far too much discussion, your domestic noise. I came into this House 2¼ years ago, and on behalf of the Labour Party, myself and the leader of the Labour Party and the Labour deputies advised this House not to vote for the bank guarantee. And I'm sorry that other parties in this House, like the Green Party, the Fine Gael Party, and indeed the Sinn Féin Party, all voted for the bank guarantee and voted wrongly. And one of the reasons that people voted for that bank guarantee was that, like today's document, it was sprung on us without an opportunity in a citizens' democracy and republic for the citizens and the representatives of the citizens to have an opportunity to read it, discuss it, and see what exactly is contained. Because, Minister, 20 minutes will not do justice to what's in this, and several elements of it, which I'll mention briefly, to my mind will require constitutional actions to be undertaken, and I'll come back to that. Minister, you, in advocating austerity and front-loading, and all your cheerleaders in the various columnists in the newspapers, all the advocates of austerity and front-loading, said, take the front-loading and the pain now, and interest rates will fall. That was your mantra, and has been your mantra for the last few weeks. The exact reverse has happened. There has been no relief on interest rates and bond spreads. On the contrary, this deal has actually spread the contagion to Portugal, and to other European countries. And unless the Eurozone ministers, and unless ECOFIN and the European Central Bank and the General Council of Europe give serious consideration to what this package is going to do to this country, this is debt deflation, as the great American economist Irving Fisher wrote at the height of the Great Depression in the United States when the Hoover government was in charge, that you would deflate an economy by a debt deflation. And we know we have an economy riddled with debt. Debt in the banks, debt among many young people with large personal mortgages, debt among many businesses who have lost business and simply can no longer find financing from our banking system. And you propose in this is actually the bill for what you said on the night of the bank guarantee would be the cheapest bailout in the world. This is the bill for the cheapest bailout in the world, because yes, we have a problem as a country in relation to a fiscal deficit, but if we as a country only had a fiscal deficit, we would have a couple of years of some austerity, probably a change of government to bring back the kind of economic management that was actually practiced by my colleague from the Labour Party, Rory Quinn, when he was the last Minister for Finance for the Labour Party in government, and left this country with a small but very important budget surplus and with an economy that was growing 1,000 jobs a week. You have brought into this House this document which indicates that we are actually going to be hobbled by a programme which makes no provision for growth in the economy. Labour advocated an adjustment of 4.5 billion, a tough adjustment, but one that is achievable. Yourselves, and indeed Fine Gael, have opted for a front-loading of the pain, a front-loading of austerity of 6 billion. I believe that, and I say this on behalf of the Labour Party, that is fundamentally economically misconceived. And I really advocate that even at this time you seek to renegotiate this document and actually provide for growth in the economy and provide for an orderly restructuring of the country's finances. Your 4 attempts to fix the banks so far, I'm sorry, Minister, have actually ended in failure. You bring us in this attempt, and I don't know if you know a very distinguished German commentator who is resolutely pro-European, Barry Eichengreen, who writes for the Financial Times of Germany, the Handelsblatt. And just to quote what he had to say today, he actually said that in relation to the Irish programme, it solves exactly nothing. It simply kicks the can down the road. It kicks the can down the road. Is kicking the can down the road for Ireland? In this case, it's a misconceived kicking of the can down the road for Europe. And if you had been a better negotiator, you would have actually said to our European partners that not alone can they make things better for Ireland, but they can engineer a better outcome for the European economies and the European currency, which are now entering an existential crisis. You don't even seem to have put that argument. Oh, well, tell us later, answer. Okay, can we get from the Minister in the questions and answers all those questions that I put to the teams of international negotiators? Give us a rundown so we can see how hard you fought for your country. Tell us, what did you do in the war, Daddy? Just tell us now in response to the questions. What we are actually doing, Ireland will be transferring, to quote Barry Eichengreen, will be transferring 10% of its national income as reparations to the bondholders year after painful year. Why does Mr. Eichengreen use the term reparations? He does it because almost every German who's literate in relation to German and European history knows about the Treaty of Versailles and the notion of what reparations does to a country. These reparations, as is described by a conservative German commentator, as being 10 years of reparations to the bondholders. So most of this document, understandably, Cathaoirleach, how much time have I left? Sorry, Cathaoirleach.
Sorry?
How much time have I left?
Sorry, you have over 9 minutes.
9 minutes, okay. Most of this document deals with the arrangements in relation to the banks. There is barely a mention of the domestic economy. There is barely a mention of the 450,000 plus people who are unemployed, or the hidden assumption in your 4-year recovery programme plan, the Green Book, the book with the green covers, that there is, I don't know, is it 40,000 a year of people will emigrate? That's your expectation in the Green Book. Could you answer that question, please? What is your government's expectation of the likely level of annual emigration during the period of the so-called recovery programme? Could you give us that? I don't believe that the kind of adjustments of $3 billion a year in the 4-year programme that you've penciled in for social expenditure can be achieved, even with the various control measures that are set out here, can be achieved unless you have another assumption of very significant annual emigration out of this country. So that would be my second question. What are the underlying assumptions about emigration and employment and unemployment in this document? In relation to the document, can I also say as well that we're buying time now for Europe while we see if Europe can put something together and can create something that will, if you like, show European firepower to the bond markets. Now, I know the Irish government is saying, and it suits a lot of commentators to say, that it was the comment by the German Chancellor, Mrs. Merkel, less than 2 weeks ago, in relation to bondholders bearing responsibilities in the future, that has caused the current wave of unrest and attack on weaker European countries, or those that are perceived to be weak. I don't agree with that. I think that because of the way the Irish crisis has been approached, and because there has been so much assertion by you and your government that Ireland was turning a corner, turning a corner, turning a corner, that turning of the corner, Minister, never came. And as a consequence, to be perfectly honest, even among Eurosceptics who were sceptical about the euro in the first place, and sceptical about the capacity of countries like Ireland to survive these adjustments, your continuous avowals that we were turning a corner means that Ireland has relatively little believability. And so Mrs. Merkel's comments, which in my view are perfectly justifiable comments, that say, in capitalism, if you make an investment and you cannot, I mean, what the bondholders are basically saying, that in the new structures of European capitalism or world capitalism, there should be no risk for bondholders. Now, capitalism actually is about the allocation of capital. That's what that's where it gets its name from. And the allocation of capital is never a risk-free project. So we know the kind of people and the ordinary investments by people like pension funds, that they want high degree of security, they want high levels of information. And clearly what happened in Ireland with our banks has come not just to us, but to them as a terrible shock, because your regulation system, set up by your predecessor, Charlie McCreevy, overseen by Brian Cowan, failed miserably and hopelessly. Added to that, your crony bankers, your crony developers, your minister, your former finance minister's Charlie McCreevy tax breaks for the construction industry, all helped to build a bubble. The European Union did not obviously have the policy instruments to oversight that in an adequate way. and the regulators in Ireland failed miserably, miserably. I don't know what they were doing. Anyway, that's for another day. And that is why Ireland has lost reputation. So you're now saying to people that debt deflation, that we can grow the Irish economy and take this level of debt burden while having this savage deflation. In the history of economics, and by the way, the IMF, I mean, we obviously met, like Fine Gael, the teams. It seemed to me, to some degree, that the IMF was playing soft cop. But also, I do think that the IMF has learned from its experience in particularly Latin America and in Africa in relation to particularly democratic stability by having austerity programs which are too great for countries to bear. The IMF has also conducted very detailed research and published it recently, showing that they can't really find, Minister, any examples of countries which have been able to successfully endure this type of deflation that you're proposing next Tuesday in your budget and actually get back to recovery. Mr. Lay, I think, has published the papers in the IMF. Now, I think there's a question here. Clearly, we have a government which really is exhausted. But, you know, the question for Europe, has Europe reached its limit? I mean, leadership from the European Union can provide a better way. Europe has the resources. And our colleague in the Socialist group in the European Parliament and the head of the PES, Paul Rasmussen, he put forward more than 2 years ago, at the start of the crisis, a proposal to have effectively Eurobonds, where weaker European nations would actually have a mechanism for borrowing. The more conservative people in the European People's Party and the group that Fianna Fáil are aligned to, I forget their complicated name. The Liberals, steady is he actually. The people aligned with Fianna Fáil and the Liberals, they have yet to be persuaded of the merit of this, but I understand they might be coming around to it. But there are solutions to the problem. What Europe needs is a Rooseveltian New Deal outlook for countries that are troubled, as opposed to the Hoover administration approach that you and your counterparts in Europe, unfortunately, seem fixed on at the moment. Can I ask you, Minister, in terms... Sorry. Can I ask you as well, what's the future of the AIB rights issue? Are you still going ahead? What's the story on the closure of Anglo? I'm told Anglo want to change their name, but they want to keep the word Irish and bank. Now, there's a puzzle for after the Christmas pudding. What's a three-letter word, or maybe it's more than three-letter words? The Irish Tent Bank. We'll run this as the Doyle Christmas cracker quiz. They want to keep Irish and they want to keep bank, but they're willing to let go of the Anglophone part of their name, apparently.
The Galway Tent Bank.
Yeah, the Galway Tent Bank. What would we call it? Can I also ask you as well, recent court cases in relation to Anglo, Minister, show that a senior director of Anglo, or senior executive, in the pages of the papers this week, indebted, as the newspapers suggest, perhaps for up to 50 million, that bank was still advancing loans to that particular individual and to developments he was involved in several months after the bank guarantee. Okay. Finally, can I just say, in relation to dealing with the bondholders, and this is the kind of default mechanism that a lot of people are talking about, you, Minister, have to take your courage in your hand. I think all the references you made in your speech to not seeking any sacrifice from the bondholders is a serious, serious mistake. Secondly, can I say to you, you want a fiscal stability law with fixed fiscal targets. We've taken legal advice because, of course, this came up before the Finance Committee, and I understand that such a fiscal stability law, as envisaged in this programme, is not actually achievable without a constitutional referendum. Now, I don't see any chance of people in Ireland voting for a constitutional referendum in relation to a fiscal stability law sometime in the middle of next year in the detailed programme. I honestly don't know why people would vote for it. In the committee, as I said, we had it researched. We had it researched by the Labour Party. We had it researched by the Labour Party. I'm glad you find it funny because, you know, I find today rather sad when we see the details of what our ordinary Irish people are to endure and to suffer. And
way beyond your time.
I'll just finish now. Can I also say as well that can I draw particular attention to Table 1 on page 33 and the subsequent table?
Very briefly.
I find those tables frightening in terms of the conditions that they impose on Ireland. Thank you.